Welcome to the pod, Anders.
Thank you very much.
I think in my LinkedIn announcement, I wrote that you required no introduction. But anyways, it's a pretty good place to start. So maybe can you introduce yourself and also how you ended up in an IT leadership role?
Sure, Christian, I'm happy to do that. I'm a Swedish guy by birth. Been working for various sort of industries across my career. Started in the Volvo group, moved to that was transportation. I moved to aerospace, working for Airbus, living in southern France. And the last few years, I've been working here in Copenhagen, working for Novo Nordisk. So that's my career in a nutshell, you could say. So how did I actually end up in IT? Funny enough, it's actually by chance. I was starting my career in research. I was working in the central research department in the Volvo Group, engine research, emission research, control systems, far away from IT, you could say. I had a stint at the headquarters in Volvo, and that's a sort of rotating position you have for young potential people, perhaps. It was time for me to leave, and they wanted to place me somewhere. They proposed me to actually take up the project lead for the largest IT program they had in the Volvo Group back then. It was a partnership program with the two external companies that had failed, so they wanted a fresh start. Right. And I was proposed to take the lead. No prior IT background. I don't know why I was selected. But anyway, I took it. Perhaps I managed to swing it around to some degree. Anyway, I got hooked. I really loved IT. I really liked it. So I decided to continue my career into the IT space. And that was some close to 20 years ago, and I stayed ever since and never regret that sort of career path, you could say.
You also, so you ended up doing digital transformation in Volvo, or IT transformation, and then you also did that at Airbus, right?
Yes,
what was that about?
Well, I think transformation and digital transformation is a theme of my career somehow. Using IT, using digital AI, if you like, to transforming the company has always been the theme, and has been different sort of horizons, different business needs, depending on. Back in the Volvo days, it was maybe more classical sort of transformation. But going into Airbus, that's maybe where the more digital transformation started to happen, where we saw the opportunities to change the business models, where we saw the opportunities to drive productivity and efficiency across the organization, whether that was early research, manufacturing, or the sales organization. And of course, back in Airbus, it was also a lot about finding new business models, starting to make use of the data. Equipping the data with a lot of sensors, actuators, so we could capture the data. We could start perhaps offering predicted maintenance and stuff like that. But it was a lot of learning early days. You discover it's not only about technology; it's also about legal contracts. Actually, we were selling some of the airplanes to customers without having the permission to actually use the data that we captured.
Oh, okay.
So then we had to buy it, or at least discuss to buy it back. But that was a transformation of both the internal efficiency and as well as new business models.
So predictive maintenance was kind of one of the business areas that you pursued. Were there other examples of that with Airbus?
It was in general trying to make a lot more money out of the service business. I mean, it's one thing to engineer the plane and sell it, but that's a one-off. The more you could add different sort of add-on services, the more revenue stream, the more customer loyalty you could actually build over time. So there was a lot of debate, discussion on how you could do that, how you could help anything from optimizing the flight route, maybe to even plan the personnel that was a limiting factor, and so on and so forth. So really optimizing the whole operation beyond the sort of the plane, you could say.
I think I heard this case study with Rolls-Royce, something like that, where they were selling miles instead of planes.
Yeah.
So were you guys thinking about that at Airbus as well, or?
Yeah, we did, and actually that we did even in the Volvo context. We discussed maybe not for private cars, but for transportation. If you could basically buy more horsepower when you have a steep hill coming up for the lorries.
Yeah.
and they need a little bit more power to go up the hill. You can buy that as a service for a few kilometers to really get up to the hill. And we did that in Airbus, yes, together with the engine manufacturers to already today, actually, for as far as I can recall, and I guess it's still the same. You're buying an airline actually buy the plane and the engine separately. So there obviously needs to be a very close collaboration between the engine and the airplane maker. But yes, could they buy it more and more as a service? That would be the desire from any customers. Absolutely, yeah.
And after Airbus, you then moved to Novo Nordisk. And that's 7-8 years ago.
Yeah, a little bit over 7 years ago. Yeah,
also been quite an interesting journey. What's kind of been the theme of the digital transformation for Novo Nordisk?
It has been a quite exciting journey. It has had a little bit different sort of phases. We started maybe the first couple of years when I started a little bit classic, trying to explore. We had a lot of POCs, proof of concepts. We had some what we call lighthouses. We explored a little bit. Probably didn't know exactly what we wanted it for, but knowing that the technology was there, exploring it. The limitations in pharma is, of course, regulatory limitations. You have different sort of limitations there, but also on the business model, it was not maybe obvious how you're gonna sell it. Then I think we had a little bit of help through the COVID, where the productivity and the way you worked had to change. So suddenly there was an emergent need for working differently inside the company. And that, of course, sparked new things, new ideas also towards the doctors, the patients and customers, if you like. So that was the next phase that was driving more generalized sort of productivity. But then we started, and that was maybe also coming with a realization that industry is shifting. We're shifting from maybe traditional pharma company to more closer and closer to a consumer-driven market. So since Novo Nordisk was moving into the obesity space, you're getting closer to a consumer business. And then you need another type of digital transformation, another tool set that you can put in the hands of your patients or customers, if you like. So internal efficiency has always been maybe the primary sort of driving force, but lately we have also seen the value in the business model and also adding sort of tools to the customer, to the patient. Yeah.
What tools could that be for in the case of Novo Nordisk?
It can vary a little bit. It started a bit actually back to the COVID times. If you remember those days, limited opportunity to move around at least in certain cities like London and Paris and others. So it was hard to find a pharmacy perhaps with your medicine. So we actually developed Find My Medicine application. So you can go on the app and you can check whether there was a pharmacy nearby and they had your medicine. So that was one. We had another a little bit later in time. We had another cool application. Obesity is something that is a stigma around. We wanted to create some awareness. We wanted to detect people that could have a benefit of the medicine. So having a person stepping up on a scale and recording or see your weight and thereby the BMI is, of course, a little bit of a stigma. And we had an idea to approach people on the airports. But you wouldn't ask a passenger walking around in the terminal to step up on a scale and expose themselves. So we actually developed a 3D scanner that could scan your face, your body, and thereby sort of estimate your body weight, the BMI. And then you can start a good conversation about the situation. So that was another type of application. Lately, we have actually developed applications or solutions that selling medicine or obesity medicine directly to consumer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You said earlier today when we talked that even though Novo Nordisk is a huge company for Danish standards, it's actually the smallest company that you work with. So how's the cultural differences between like Volvo in Sweden, Airbus in France, and Novo Nordisk in Denmark? What's kind of the biggest differences?
That's the fun part, I would say. By moving around a little bit, you discover that, and you're right. I worked for 3 big companies, but actually Novo Nordisk being the smallest in terms of, I think actually both number of employees and revenue. But there are many similarities and many differences. You can say from a technology standpoint, in fact, the companies are quite similar. They're using very much the same tech stack. I even discovered when I moved from Airbus to Novo Nordisk that the same vendors, even the same account managers from the vendor showed up in my face, sort of, which is a interesting sort of observation, but fully fine, of course. So I think the biggest difference is in the culture. Every company based on a certain country perhaps is unique and different. So I think Volvo and Novo Nordisk is maybe closer to each other. Scandinavian roots, somehow the values are sort of similar. Despite that, I have to apply another leadership in Novo Nordisk than I did back in Volvo days. Novo is a little bit more direct to take decisions, and Volvo was even more consensus driven. But the biggest difference is, of course, between Novo, Volvo, and Airbus. Airbus was much more of a classical, in a way, hierarchical company, a little bit elitistic in the approach, where still education and titles matter more than maybe here in Scandinavia. Small examples where I was still called by most of the suppliers and even some of the employees that didn't know me, Mr. Romare, instead of my normal name. And so different sort of culture, and you notice that in small and big things in the company. But as a leader, you often can learn how to navigate. And I learned to keep many of my Scandinavian sort of leadership skills and practices and apply them in another sort of context. And they were actually quite appreciated in that sort of context. And I think also Airbus underwent quite a cultural sort of change under the CEO's leadership, and he wanted to modernize maybe the culture a bit. And yeah,
cool. Now you are making kind of a switch in your career, going from the corporate role with a CIO position to something else. What's driving that change?
That's a good question, and I mean, there's many things that drives things. Some are maybe by chance, some are others are a little bit planned. I think it's a combination. I mean, first of all, I'm approaching retirement sort of age, not quite there yet, but it's start to be that sort of age. So there's a private side, there's a professional side. You can say quickly on the private side, I mean, my wife stopped working a couple of years ago, and I would definitely enjoy spending a little bit more time with her. So that would be a good reason to change a little bit. On the professional side, I've been running large organizations for quite some time. When I stepped out of Novo Nordisk, stepped down from the role, I've been the CIO, CDIO for Novo Nordisk more than 7 years. That actually meant at that point in time, I was one of the longest serving CIOs in the pharma industry. Was one other guy, we had exactly the same sort of time in the role, you could say. But so 7 years in the same role in pharma context is quite long. And you can also feel at some point in time you start to be maybe time for the next guy and girl to take over and drive the journey forward and come up with new, fresh ideas. Then for me and for the company, I think it's always a timing question. When is the time to leave, and when should you leave to someone else? I was so lucky in a way. I think it was a good timing. The company wanted a change. I wanted a change, and that led to a good situation for both parties. So.
And what's next?
What's next? Doing podcast. That's one thing to do. No, but next, I have a few avenues I can explore. I have basically said to publicly, I'm not necessarily want to go into another full-time permanent CIO or equivalent sort of position. That's not my ambition. You never know, but that's not my ambition. No, based on my long experience and what I have done, I would prefer to have a little bit more flexible way of working. Perhaps you can say even in a way giving back. using my knowledge and experience in advisory positions for advisory board positions or helping companies in many ways. Maybe a little bit consultancy, maybe some board works, maybe a little bit interim position. So nowadays they call it portfolio career, and maybe that's what I'm aiming for a little bit, a mix of things. But I'm eager to still contribute with my background and knowledge to where it can have an impact.
And where do you think there will be the most impact? What are you most excited about doing next, or where do you think that you can?
I think for me has always been, or at least the last 20 years, 3 areas where I really feel engaged and really would like to contribute and drive things. And first and foremost is maybe transformation or change in general. I really strive for that. I really feel engaged in that, and I think I can really contribute to that. And driving transformation, driving change is often quite complex and harder than you think. And that's where I have a lot of experience, and I really would like to continue to do that. I'm not necessarily at my best when there's steady state. I can do it, I have done it, and I continue to do that, but I really like to drive change, transformation. So that's one thing. The second thing that is a passion of mine is leadership. I very much enjoy driving organizations, seeing people growing, seeing my managers evolving new positions, maybe overtaking my position at some point in time. So leadership in general. I mean, I've been leading in my career anything from one-person team to several thousand people in larger companies, and that's my second sort of passion. I very much enjoy. And maybe the third is strategy. I have a passion for strategy. Probably my mind, my brain is working in concepts and strategies is something that resonates well with me, and I like to see the big picture and try to put them in place. But also a little bit more than just put them on place in paper. I really would like to engage in the transformation of those strategies as well.
Guess you've also seen quite a lot of things during your career, seeing the shifts with the technology advancements, so cloud and data and so on. How do you think that the role of IT is changing?
I think that has been quite obvious over the last few years. I think maybe working inside an IT organization, we have always felt that IT has been or should be the important somehow, and it's some kind of core functionality. In reality, in many of the companies, basically the 3 companies I've been working for, this has probably been seen, at least until recently, more as a back office function, support function, but I think we start seeing that changing step by step. But clearly, when I started, it was a support function, back office function, important for sure, appreciated for sure, but not necessarily part of the core in the company. You saw that reflected, of course, in the organizational structure, the seniority of the people. I think with a digital transformation, you started to see it changing. People saw the value coming. You can start seeing, in 10 years ago, you started to see the title changing a little bit from CIO to CDIO, Chief Digital Officer, Data Officer. It was maybe not fully clear what exactly that meant and what was the difference. Sometimes the companies were running a CIO and a CDIO in parallel, and that we actually did in Airbus. It was not obvious and easy, and many companies has now combined them, like my last position in Novo Nordisk. But you clearly saw the change because you got closer to the business. You got more understanding that this is bringing business value, and I think I clearly saw it in my journey in Novo Nordisk, where when I started, it was a bit of a back office. But then the executive team started to pay attention, asking questions. Then the board started to do the same, and thereby you saw the interest of the company became a standard reporting to the board, to the executive team, of course, as well. And you understood that this going to have an impact for the company, both the digital AI part, but also the cybersecurity part, of course, that is often part of the parameters. So I think over the years you have seen it changing, and I kept following a little bit how it's governed in many companies, and you can clearly see that today's in most companies, at least in pharma that I followed lately, it's actually part of the C-suite, so the executive management team, and so there has been a gradual shift where it's actually have a direct impact on the value that the company producing.
So moving closer to the business and
moving very much closer to the business, being part of the business, not speaking about it as a back office support function, but really being the business. Yes.
I think there's a tendency to always, or at least what I see often, is that there's misalignment between business and IT has always kind of been a topic. It's like it's never really solved. Do you think that you were closer to solving it in Novo Nordisk now that you were kind of moving more or less into the business, or how do you see that being solved?
No, I think it's still one of the fundamental governance sort of topics that needs to be resolved somehow, and I'm not sure you can fully resolving it. And why is that? Well, because you have actually different sort of KPIs, if you like, or things that you cater for. I mean, a CIO. Yes, you can drive value creation, you can drive innovation, you can drive many things. But the fundamental sort of thing that you're still expected to do is, of course, driving a cost-efficient operation. So the 24/7 operation of all the IT system, that you keep cost under control, that you don't have any cyber attacks, that you don't have any major incidents. That's sort of the basics that needs to be in place. And of course, for a CIO, to do that requires a lot of resources and attention. And that inherently somehow conflict with the business value creation, which is another axis, you could say. So if you are in a line of business, you might care less about the architecture landscape. You just want a quick tool that solves your problem. You might care less about whether that data can be integrated with other data, can be reused. And so business value that you create, but with a short-term sort of horizon, that is sort of conflicting with maybe the longer-term horizon that the CIO needs to take. So inherently there is a bit of a conflict between creating short-term value and keeping the cost under control. So how do you combine that? Of course, it's what I learned over the years. It requires very good collaboration inside the company. You need to have the same understanding from both sides on limitations and opportunities somehow. So I really have been trying to build a culture where you're working very closely together with colleagues from the line of business. My organization, we didn't have an office on our own necessarily. We tried to put the teams next to the business colleagues. Try to have the same agenda, sharing the same ideas and same goals. So you learning from both sides what is important. So inherently there is something difficult to line the agenda, but you have to do that. And I think CIOs are probably asked to leave the company for both reasons. Being too stubborn on the long term and not creating value, but also being maybe a little bit too crazy on the business creation and thereby crashing the system. So navigating that delicate balance is key somehow.
And balancing between running and building.
Exactly. Yeah.
Difficult.
And we actually had it. That was one of my key statements in my organization when I was in Novo Nordisk. We call it always on, always moving. So operation and building, sort of, but with other words.
We have all these new technologies coming in as well. AI is one of the big ones, right? Do you think that requires a different mindset compared to the previous new technologies or emerging technologies that we've seen earlier, like cloud or the like?
Both yes and no. I think any transformation, any project has to be standing on the same merits. It doesn't really matter whether it's a business or IT or digital AI. They still need to create the value. They still need to have a solid ROI. So in that sense, I think they need to be measured in the same way. But yes, AI also have the potential to be something different. So it has more transformative impact potentially than any other technology I've seen over the years. Digital, yes, could change the business models, but I think the AI has a more fundamental sort of impact on how company going to be organized, working, driving the business. So I think it do require some different level of thinking around that.
On that topic, how do you then think that the organization will look like in 5-10 years or further down the line?
Yeah. I think that's extremely difficult to imagine. I mean, just try to think back a little bit. When was the iPhone introduced on the market?
I think in 2008 or something.
Yeah,
like that,
pretty
right?
close.
07.
I think 2007. I think it was. I mean, today hardly anyone can imagine living without a smartphone of some sort, and more and more functions are built into the. I mean, you take photos, you make your banking, you do everything on your smartphone today.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think back, Gen AI was hitting the market 3 years ago, I think, or something like that. And today, I was actually visiting my 91-year-old father over the last weekend.
Wow.
And he had, to my surprise, he had bought a new iPad. He didn't like the iPad; it was too small. He doesn't see so well, so he bought an iPad Pro to get it larger. But then he had some problems, so he needed my help. Assuming that former CIO should be able to give him support, and I managed actually. But anyway, he wanted to install something, and then he showed me on his iPad. I said, "I found a solution here," he said. And then I noticed, how did he find the solution? Well, he had gone on ChatGPT and asked ChatGPT to provide him with an outline of a solution for installing on his iPad Pro. So that shows me that the impact of Gen AI is quite amazing. I mean, even broad population is starting to use it. Same when I ask my friends, they're actually using it. I can even sense sometimes that people privately using modern technology, Gen AI, more than we actually did back at work. So somehow the impact starts to come very strongly. But so that was only introduced on the market 3 years ago. So when you say 5-10 years ago ahead of us, how will the organization, how will work look like? It's very hard to say. My personal belief is, in a way, we do underestimate the long-term impact, and we overestimate the short-term impact on AI, Gen AI. So I believe that in 5-10 years, we're going to see a dramatic shift in the way we're working. And I think we can see it in many small things at work. I don't think anyone actually writes a CV any longer, for instance.
No.
That would be done by a chatbot, and actually I was advised when I left now, and I sort of refreshed my CV a little bit, maybe for another type of role, like we spoke about, the advisory roles, board roles. I wrote it actually myself.
Okay.
And I had a me myself, but I had a coach from a company I know in US working with executive search, and they said, well, you better run this one through an AI bot, and I did, and guess what? It's much better. So that's how it is, and so people say LinkedIn, that we're all using, many of us using. I mean, people claim LinkedIn will be gone in 5 years. No one needs that. People start saying SaaS applications is not needed. Agents, Gen AI, I don't know, but we can actually notice now. And I saw a post today on LinkedIn. The number of people in tech industry that has been laid off the last month or so is actually quite a lot. Is that due to technology or just business climate? Hard to say. Maybe a combination. But I think actually you start to see some impact on company needs to drive efficiency through AI and forcing maybe layoffs and other things. So I believe that 5-10 years from now we're going to see a totally different setup in organization. Will it? I don't think it's going to be detrimental for you and me and others. I think we're going to find other things to do, but not exactly the same as today. We saw it and see it in Novo. I hope for the future. I mean, the way we discovered drugs changed. The way we analyze data from clinical trials changed. The way we're approaching customers, patients changed. So I think it's going to have a dramatic impact. And if you go on the internet, I mean, a lot of people discuss you can cut the drug discovery lead time from 10 to 5 years. Has a huge impact, of course. You would go to internet tech companies. They say we hardly write any software any longer. That's written 90% by the bots. And I think the difficult to understand for me as a leader would be, how do you get the senior people to be trained? Because the junior people, if you take software development, maybe a lot of the junior people is not needed, but you cannot become a senior expert if you haven't done your harder years trying to write the code yourself, perhaps. So how will that change? That's maybe. But I think we're going to see a dramatic change. I think we're going to see a dramatic change in products. But I wouldn't dare to predict the future. But I'm quite sure we're not going to need to fear as individuals.
No.
But we need to be able to change and adapt accordingly.
So repurposing ourselves to some extent, right?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
it's probably not because that Novo Nordisk or like there will still be quite a lot of people working in the big corporations, right? They might just be doing different things.
Absolutely. And normally those shift in technology opens new opportunities. I mean, keep in mind, some of the work that large corporations do today is quite repetitive, quite boring. You actually have quite well-educated people doing very simple, repetitive tasks that actually, probably those people, when they freed up and can use the talent to something else, they would actually welcome that. But has not maybe been possible due to regulations, technology limitations. So I think there's more of an opportunity than a threat.
Where do you see the biggest opportunities for a company like Novo Nordisk with AI? You mentioned clinical trials and other areas. Manufacturing could be a place. Where do you see the biggest impact happening?
Yeah. I think you have a few areas. I think the general productivity gain is across industries and very obvious in a way. I mean, you can see, of course, companies making analysis and coming up with anything between 20, 25, 30% sort of productivity gain. And of course, if you are a company with 50, 100,000 people, that makes a difference if you can do that. So that is maybe not the differentiator for large companies or any company. But it's a necessity. You need to harvest that to stay in the game. You cannot leave that opportunity on the table. So there you have the broad population that needs to start using all the tooling that is available out there. Will we spoke about it. We will hardly do maybe if I use classical office tooling, PowerPoint and Word and. That will be much more automatized for the future, for sure. So that sort of productivity gain, yes, that's a big chunk that you need to do. But then you have the second area is the internal processes. You need to go through them and really fundamentally transform them. I mean, you have always been able to automatize RPA, robot process automation. We tried for many years and have some success. Now you see a little bit the same, perhaps coming with AI and agents. But I think the danger is if you only do RPA plus sort of, and now you really need to fundamentally sort of change the processes and take the impact. And then of course you can have huge gains in productivity. I mean, we've seen it in Novo Nordisk on small process steps. You can go from weeks to hours or days. But the thing is, not until you can start trusting the full cycle, you can really gain. If you take a quality process, not until you can do this fully automatized. If the regulatory body still requires maybe a human in the loop, then it slows down. So it's also interaction between companies and tech and regulatory sort of bodies. But the internal processes can clearly be done more efficient for the future. So that's another efficiency gain that can be a bit competitive advantage. Then of course, where it really would have a huge impact is what makes every industry unique, and there can be different sort of processes. In Novo, of course, the drug discovery sort of process. Could you go from 10 years to 5 years, for instance, as I spoke about? That has a huge impact, of course. Time to market, helping patient to live a better life. But also what we have started to see is how we could, in silico, simulate the new molecules. Instead of have a lab technician or a scientist discover a few, you can let the computer scan a wide spectrum of possible solutions. We're putting them in automatized wet lab robots that test thousands of samples and then generate the data and feed it back and then generate new samples. So by that, of course, you can also not only go faster, but you can find new drugs, new molecules that you never had seen or envisioned in the past. So in drug discovery, I understand from our scientists. I mean, I'm not a scientist. I'm an IT guy, but I can understand from the scientific sort of community that they are extremely optimistic and eager to use this modern technology. Clinical trials is another very important topic that's in a way harder to accelerate, because why do you do clinical trials? Because you would like to, in real life, verify that the drug is safe and efficient. So it's sometimes very hard to do that on an accelerated scale. But could you envision that you can start trusting some of the data, you can do predictions, maybe you can actually cut the time and do another risk-reward analysis based on data. So I think, and I had an emotional moment a couple of years ago attending a seminar, and one of the panelists, he took a personal story. He worked with the clinical trials, and he said, I think it was his daughter, in fact, she died of cancer.
All right.
And that same cancer variant is now treatable a few years down the road, and they actually did know that the drug was in the pipeline. You know, for him, could he have helped cutting the lead time? You know, that could have saved a patient, and in this case, it was actually his daughter. But I think that's the mindset of many people working in the pharma industry, that time to market is important. Not only for the company and earning money and all of that, but also you're actually helping a patient out there, and that's important.
Moving from experimentation, because Novo probably also started somewhere else than doing simulations and clinical trials and all of that. How do you see companies moving from just testing and being experimental to actually having some solid use cases that provides business value? How should they go about that?
I think that's actually one of the key questions, and I think a lot of companies are in that sort of phase where the discovery phase start to be over, you could say, or the honeymoon start to come to an end. I mean, it was 3 years ago and everything exploded. We all went into the proof of concept sort of phase, and we started perhaps also working with partnerships and generating a lot of ideas. We did the same in Novo. We generated a lot of potential sort of business ideas, and that's fine. I think we had at one point in time a map of roughly 60 business cases across the value chain, and everyone was basically eager to get going and capture the value and experiment. And perhaps that was the time when that was sort of the right approach and encourage. But you quite quickly realized if you're going to run so many proof of concepts in parallel, you're exhausting your resources, you're spreading yourself too thin. In many cases, the technology was maybe not as good as you expected. So a lot of companies has, I think, come to the realization that they need to scale down. They need to find the business cases that really matters, that has a huge impact on the company, not spreading yourself all over the place. And I think that's what you see happening. You can read that many papers all over the place. And that focus, I think, is quite important, and that's the first phase. I think what many companies also realizing is that it's not only the number of proof of concept, but you're realizing that the underlying data needs to be in a good shape. Has always been the case a little bit when you started with digital. You started to say data is the new oil and you need to have it. But now with the AI, Gen AI, it's sort of accelerating. If you don't have the data in good place, if you don't have the infrastructure around the data, nothing really good comes out of that. If you train your models on bad data, wrong data, nothing good comes out of that. So it also forces you back a little bit to the drawing board. You need to go back and make sure that you have the data that you need and have it in a good shape. And then you back a little bit to where I discussed the dilemma between structure and long-term perspective and fast business value. But I think swinging back a little bit in AI, Gen AI, from only fast proof of concept, that yes, you need a little bit structure, you need to go back to the drawing board and create that sort of solid data foundation so you can start in a structured way generate data. So I think that's the phase we see many companies now entering into, I would say. Some are further ahead, and some are starting the journey, I guess.
I think the data foundation is super important and a really good perspective to have. And I think for me there's probably a bit of a balance, because you can, of course, continue to build a data foundation from now until forever.
Exactly.
But actually figuring out, okay, what is the most important data points or data that you need to solve that specific use case, and then get that fixed, and then kind of build upon that in the data foundation, so that you can actually get going with some of the AI use cases before you necessarily have everything in order.
Yeah. No, I think you're fully right. And that's the trap that I think some of us being CIOs fall into. We see the big picture, and we really would like to solve the big picture, and we draw it too far out. And we say, we need this data in order, and 5 years down the road, you're going to have it. But then there's maybe no business left. And
exactly.
So you need to find a balance, find it. And normally I talked about the staircase, build a little bit fundamental, make sure you get the value, continue that journey together with the line of business. So finding that balance is quite important.
A lot of companies are ramping up on AI competences. Do you think that everything should be kind of in-house, or how do you look at the talent management for AI from a big corporate context?
It's a topic I've thought about a lot in general over the years. I mean, should the internal IT data digital organization be in-house? Should it be outsourced? Should it work in partnership in an ecosystem? It goes a little bit in cycles. A little bit. There's some kind of fashion in this. Sometimes you should outsource. You're using maybe the big outsourcing vendors. Sometimes you're building it in-house. I worked in all the models, you can say. Back in the Volvo days, we had 80% in-house. Airbus had roughly 20%, and Novo is somewhere in the middle. So I can reflect, and I can see the pros and cons with different sort of models. Personally, I've landed in actually close to the Novo model in a way, so somewhere in the middle, which is not a walk in the park either. You can say it's always easy to be in the middle, but that's maybe not the truth. But I think you need enough in-house competence to drive things. If you don't have the knowledge and competence, it's hard to drive a partnership and ecosystem. So you need to have some level of critical mass so you can steer and guide and know what you talk about and what you buy potentially. I don't necessarily believe you can have everything in-house. How can any company of any size, basically, even Novo, that is a big company, at least here in Denmark, how could we have all the capabilities, competences needed in this sort of space? I think that's a dream that cannot really come true. And there's so many new startup companies. There's so many good consultancies out there that can support and help you. So you need to be smart enough to use the external the knowledge. I think it's at least for large companies. I think it's something difficult somehow, because you're running a large organization to suddenly say this I'm going to buy and trust someone else is often quite difficult. But I think if you're really going to be at the forefront, at the edge, you need to be able to work with the ecosystem and buy both products, services from people that have done it before, but still keep critical mass so you are in control.
Now you just mentioned build and buy. So I'm curious to hear your perspective on that. When do you think that you should buy an AI product versus build an AI product?
Yeah, it's one of those questions you need to pay a lot of attention to, and Once again, now I'm criticizing my own profession in a way, and myself most likely. I mean, it's so fun to build something.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, we can all agree to that. You have to roll up your sleeves and you start coding and do things. But I fundamentally believe that you should never do that if you can buy it. And I'm even willing to buy something that is sort of 80% good enough or close enough. I tried to build things all my career. Actually, I still remember when I was a young engineer out of university, and I worked in the R&D space and small corporate research lab, and I was frustrated with a financial system. We couldn't follow up the orders and invoices. So over the Christmas, I hacked a financial invoicing follow-up system in Excel over Christmas, and it worked. And I came back, and then the CFO of that small company, she saw it and said, "Oh, couldn't we do that for the corporate? That was excellent." And then I said, "Yes, why not?" And then I started to realize soon that what I did on my leisure time, 100% became a full-time sort of job, and I basically tried to do something that any modern financial accounting system should be doing. So I learned that quite early, that if it's not really unique, you should really just buy and adapt your processes to the standards. I mean, how many ways can you do accounting? How many ways can you do HR processes? How many ways can you do document management? No. Drop those things and go for standard system. Try to identify where you really have a uniqueness. And then you should focus on maybe building those solutions. Building might not mean that you do all the coding even. Might be that you're designing the system to fit your business model, and then you can use partners, of course, for various part of the tech stack and coding and whatnot. But I think we should avoid building things that is basically standard or close to standard. And it's tempting. I done it myself for this small crazy example, but also done it in a larger context once in a while. And I learned that as time goes by, the market catch up. Maybe you started with a unique idea, but it doesn't take long before there is a solution on the market that fits your needs. You cannot keep up with the professional services solutions out there.
No, I very much agree. I think the only case where it makes sense to maybe, let's take the case of AI, where you urgently need to build the competences to actually work with AI.
Yeah.
Then there might be some simple use cases that you could go out and buy, but where it actually makes sense to just try to do it yourself, knowing that it might not bring a lot of new value, but just to build the competences internally and get the learnings so that you can actually spot the good use case or the most promising use case where you can bring a lot of value, and then you have the team that's actually capable of doing it.
Yeah.
So it's more like a learning round. But I otherwise agree.
Yeah. I fully agree. I mean, and that's back to the critical mass. You need to find a way to acquire that critical mass and capabilities, and that's a good way to do it.
Exactly.
You take a few early prototypes and you build it in house. In Airbus, we actually kept teams doing software development in parallel to the ecosystem, just to keep that knowledge available also in the company if needed. So you did a bit of a parallel sort of development, actually as a more or less as a cost investment. Yeah.
I'm curious to hear, because Novo was, that's of course a huge team, and a lot of AI competences and data competences across the organization. What I've seen with a lot of the companies that we're working with is that they're setting up an AI center of excellence to kind of start with. How did you go about organizing around AI in Novo?
It's a little bit the same, you could say. It varies a little bit because you have different sort of needs in different parts of the company, at least in a big company like Novo. You can say for the more enterprise-wide solutions, for functions with maybe limited sort of capabilities and competence, they for sure in Novo Nordisk could rely on a center of excellence for AI that was under my leadership in my organization. So that makes sense. And that covers a good portion of the company, you could say, that don't have an interest or possibility to build it up. But then you would have, and we spoke about them, at least in Novo, two areas, drug discovery, is maybe the most prominent example. I mean, drug discovery is a very, very scientific, you need very, very deep understanding. And there's no real difference between that and AI. It's sort of interlinked. So in a context like that, a center of excellence to try to do drug discovery through AI doesn't really make sense. Maybe the center of excellence can help with data engineering and infrastructure around data and so on and so forth. But there you need probably more of a specialized local center of excellence if you want it in the R&D organization. The same is probably true around some of the clinical trial data cleaning, data science around that is very unique and very specialized. So it varies a little bit. So it's all about maybe the size of the business where you put it. But somehow, and maybe I'm in general in favor of not building up competence capabilities in too many places in an organization. It's hard many times to get the talent. It's hard, even maybe harder to retain the talent. And I think I've seen that in all the companies I've been working. When you're spreading them out in too many places, maybe it's fun for the first project, but when that is done, there's not maybe necessarily a second one lined up. If you put them in a pool of or a center of excellence, maybe there's easier to move on to new exciting sort of projects.
You capture the learnings.
You capture the learnings in one place and reusing it. So it's a balance. So, but in general, I'm in favor of trying to put. I try to avoid the word centralization.
Yeah.
But putting it in one place. That place can be in many places in the organization. But try to concentrate knowledge and learning in as few places as possible, I would say. But also respecting that if you're really centralizing it, you're probably building an ivory tower and hard to be fast enough and get the value to the local business.
Yeah, but I think it makes a lot of sense to be very, very. If you have a very specific use case, you need to be very close to that specific use case. Otherwise, if you're sitting too far apart, you don't understand the issue. You can't really solve it.
Exactly.
But getting your hands dirty and being part of it.
Yeah.
But that can of course be anchored in some sort of center of excellence where you then bring back the people when they are done with that project, and then you can apply them for the next next area, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Another very interesting technology shift that's been going on is related to cybersecurity.
Yeah.
So back in the days, it was more kind of firewalls and ensuring that you the premises were secure and so forth. How do you think that cybersecurity has changed over the last few years?
Oh, but that's a good, in a way, good description. I think back in the days it was firewalls. It was part of the head of infrastructure in the company. Perhaps he put up a few firewalls and make sure some basics. Today it's in most companies probably a board topic where you're reporting to the board and they oversee it. And why is that? I think most companies today realize it's a true business threat. It can have a detrimental impact on your business if the business stops for a day or a week or a month. And I think you can read in press on a regular basis where basically large companies are hit and stopped. And even big, even the tech companies once in a while have hiccups, Microsoft, Amazon and others. So, so I think today on the board it's a key topic. That was the case in Novo, where me and my team on a regular basis provided the executive team and the board with updates and reports and educational sessions on the topic. So. And of course, then depending on your industry, I mean, if you are in financial, I mean, then it's really critical, of course, in many aspects. For a company like Novo Nordisk, for a phase here where we really had to secure production 24/7 and ramping up very, very quickly. I mean, any small hiccup on production, a cyber attack, closing down a plant for even an hour or a day, would of course have a direct impact on our ability to deliver value to our patients. So for sure, in many companies, basically have 24/7 operation is crucial for providing the services and value that you want. So for Novo, it was obvious. So it's really gone from something hidden in the basement to something that senior executives, the board, even the board pay attention to
And what, from a board perspective, what is it that they want to get updated on?
I mean, they want to. I mean, a board can only, of course, understand to a certain level. They oversee the whole company on a strategic level. I mean, they really make sure that the governance is in place, that they can feel and trust that the procedures are in place, the governance are in place. That I think a board also realize that cyber attack can happen in any company, even if you have the best. CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, and the best team and throw money. I mean, it can still happen. So you also need to make sure that you have procedures that, if it happens, that you have contingency plans, the business can survive, they can restart, etc. So what they worry about is that you have the procedures in place, have mechanism in place. They worry normally less about tech and you have the latest sort of tech stack, but just that you have the machinery in place for basically protect the company, but also to make sure that you can continue operation and restart the company in a proper way. So that sort of oversight that they are keen on. And then, of course, nowadays there's more and more regulatory topics that a board needs to be aware of. NIS 2 is one coming into Europe recently. And then basically it says that the board needs to be understanding it. They need to have some basic training around it, and because they are basically responsible for that and can be, as a board, penalized sort of if they don't fulfill that sort of obligation. So.
I think what I hear is that the boards are getting more aware of the threat of cybersecurity and the incidents that can follow. But I also hear that some of them are kind of more seeing it as something that goes on in IT, and that needs to be kept up to date, of course. But it's also something that they might not focus too much on before something bad happens. How do those CIOs sitting out there educate the board to understand, okay, this is something that really needs our attention, and we need to actually invest heavily in this space?
No, but I think you're right somehow. I mean, it's like many basic services, electricity. I mean, no one pays attention to that as long as you can plug in your equipment and the day it goes out, then you pay attention. And it's a little bit the same, I mean, with cybersecurity, information security, that I would guess many boards don't know so much about it. They worry not so much about it because it's far away. It hasn't happened, that sort of company. You can say luckily or unfortunately, as you like, but many companies has been hit. Here in Denmark, we have a few famous examples. And, you know, senior people, they network like anyone else, and board members, they do the same. And so, of course, in a way, when some of the big Danish companies had incidents 6-7 years ago and onwards here, that of course raises the awareness and interest in other boards and in Novo Nordisk for sure. And we try to learn, and we're sharing that both on a more operational level, but also up to boards and others. So I think the awareness is getting there more and more, and I think also if you see a board composition, my understanding at least from my horizon, it's actually often a competence that is sought after to have on the board. Okay. Not a specialist, but being aware of cybersecurity, information security is a capability they're looking for in board compositions. Yeah.
All right. And broadly speaking, so now AI and cybersecurity and a lot of things are going on within the IT and digital space. What do you see as being kind of the main challenges or opportunities to address for the CIO going forward?
In cybersecurity?
Just broadly speaking.
Broadly speaking? It's I think back to one thing I thought about, but didn't maybe mention early in the conversation. I think one of the challenges as a CIO is to prioritize, because you have so many challenges and opportunities. And you spoke about talent, AI, many things. So the challenge for a CIO is to try to decide where to prioritize. And I think it's actually better to prioritize a few and drop a few than try to be all over the place. But I think that's the challenge for a CIO, and you need to be very closely aligned with your business colleagues. That means that the CIO, I believe, needs to spend as much time with his business colleagues as with his own team and tech vendors and others, because you really need to understand the business and be with them and try to understand where is the priority right now. And that's shifting all the time. I mean, for one period of time in Novo Nordisk, I mean, ramping up production was number one.
Yeah.
And we put a lot of people into doing that and make sure that we can do that and that production was running 24/7. Now, a company like Novo Nordisk, no secret. I mean, now we having more of a challenge maybe on the market in US and need to address maybe resources not only in IT but addressing how we market or get the products out to the patients. So the priority keeps shifting all the time. So I think the role of a CIO and business colleagues is to take the tech stack, the opportunities, call them what you want, and make sure you really prioritize and align them really well with the business needs for the moment, because they keep changing a little bit. And then there are some fundamentals that you can never neglect, and I'm repeating that a little bit. I mean, 24/7 operation or operations, cybersecurity, you can never really compromise on those. You need to have them all the time. They keep on growing. Perhaps there's a tendency, maybe in my experience, that they grow over time and eating up more and more of the innovation sort of space. So you need to drive that very efficient to make sure you have enough time to also innovate and provide value.
Working with those priorities, like on a very practical level, how do you do that? Is that just through calling up the different stakeholders and having dialogues, or is there a more structured approach to it when you do it, or what's your learnings there?
I think most companies would have some kind of structure behind it. Not the same. If I look back in my three companies, Volvo had a clear structure. Airbus actually didn't have a clear structure. So there was no real governance on the group level. We had a CIO, and how he did it, I don't fully know. But there was no board. Novo Nordisk has a board as well. So Volvo and Novo Nordisk have some kind of internal structure, call it a board if you like. We had that in Novo Nordisk. I was sharing that. Sharing is a strong word. I mean, it's a collaboration. The colleagues are there, same seniority level. We come together, we govern this together and try to prioritize. The difficulties with that is, of course, any topic that's spanning across organizational boundaries is hard in a way, because you do that as a collaboration more than a chain of command. But I think it's needed to have that. You need also to have. So that's what I did as a structural sort of basis. I tried my best to call colleagues, discuss with them. When you're building that sort of relationship and trust, they will also start calling you, I believe, and inviting you. Instead of discovering late that there is something ongoing and there's a need to help, you're part of the journey from day one. You're invited to the table day one. So it's a mix of, yes, you need some formal structure, but you need to build a lot of relationships. You need to call a lot of people. You need to go for lunches or meet at the coffee machine or whatnot. So relationship and trust is important in many companies.
Awesome. The final question that I actually have here is for the new generation of CIOs or Chief Digital Officers. What is then your kind of one piece of advice that you would give on to the next generation?
Yeah. I've been asked that question many times also by my internal younger employees when I do coaching sessions or presentations. And I think my answer has been the same for many years. It's two parts. I think it's very important to be curious, experiment, learn, and draw the learning. So don't fall back into a passive sort of role. Be curious, learn technology, stay relevant, and So that's one part, but draw the learnings. Don't keep on repeating failures. The second, which is maybe the most important, which I keep repeating, and it's harder than you think in reality, at least in large companies. But you can phrase it different. But I say keep your eyes on the ball, to take a sports metaphor, I guess. And with the ball, I mean creating business value. So you need to make sure that you're actually creating business value constantly, you could say. The moment that you fall as a CIO, you fall back and get so excited and fall in love with your own technology, then you're out, I believe. So keep the eyes on the ball, keep the eyes on make sure that you deliver.
Keep the customer happy.
Yeah, that's another way to phrase it. So, but you still have a mission and a mandate as a CIO. So you still need to, as we've spoken about before. But fundamentally, you need to make sure that you keep the customer happy. You deliver the business value. That's number one.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Anders.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Really a pleasure there.